Because I'm Carlos podcast, back, second episode in the month of August. Very exciting. In all honesty, warranted as well, since there is quite a bit to talk about as far as the hobby and things going on. But for the most part, this episode is going to be a bit of a mishmash. I'm going to add a couple of things, talking about some things that I mentioned on the YouTube channel as well. But then obviously we'll elaborate more as we learn more. So the big story of this particular week was the move from the NFLPA terminating Panini's license to produce NFLPA licensed materials, which is to say the actual player's name and likenesses. Now that's separate from the NFL license, which is the logos and team nicknames and I think mascots and a few other things related to it. So it's a situation where by doing that, and in that correspondence they had with the agents, and funny enough, not a public statement, but strictly to the agents, was that they were basically informing the agents to tell their clients, the players, that as a result of that, Fanatics was now going to be the one exclusively having the license for the NFLPA. And in turn, they were encouraged to complete whatever outstanding contracts they have with Panini, but in this case, that future cards were going to be with Fanatics. And this is years in advance of when the contract and the license was originally going to expire, and then transfer over to Fanatics anyway, because Fanatics has the license for the NFL, for the NFLPA, for the NBA, and for the NBA Players Association over the next couple of years. It was going to transition over to them regardless in all of these players associations and leagues, no matter what. All this did was bump up the timetable. But in turn, this is just another step in the process of kind of this ongoing legal battle in terms of happening on all fronts between Fanatics and Panini over control over these licenses between these two sports. Now, I'm also going to include a little clip in here of a discussion and interview that I did on K-Dub's High Five, which is a YouTube channel, and I'll include a link to the specific episode, but I'll play a clip of it for you where this is maybe, it was published maybe a week before this happened, but then even before that, we recorded that days before that. So it's a situation where I kind of mentioned the idea of a total war between Fanatics and Panini and kind of something that I anticipated, talked about kind of a best case scenario and worst case scenario, and I believe that the best case and worst case kind of stand. But one thing I wanted to add here is that between the first episode that I did on the YouTube channel already, and I'll include a link to that here, speculation aside, we really haven't learned that much new. The only real thing that happened is that Panini responded by making a request to send this to arbitration, which in turn could have an impact on how far this goes forward. And then we got a little bit of information, presumably about the reason why the NFL Players Association felt like they were in a position to be able to effectively break this contract, terminate it ahead of time, where it would normally have been required to expire before they proceeded forward. And the only real indicator that we got is that there was a material breach of the contract. And in this case, what we were given and provided by the kind of shady, murky sources that are out there is that it was presumably used in a clause kind of related to a change in control. And the reason why that sounds very vague is that it is. What constitutes a change in control, what exactly that means, if it's something they can even do, is all going to be up to the lawyers in terms of what happens between any subsequent lawsuits or legal battles or the arbitration itself. The question really comes down to, if you're talking about arbitration, is what is actually in the contract? And that's one key element that we don't have any real insight into. And that's going to be the final answer on this. It's going to tell us basically what is actually there for them to be able to move forward on. It's going to let us know if the NFLPA actually has a leg to stand on to be able to make this kind of move, or if it's something where they kind of moved out of turn. But you have to assume, I think reasonably, that that a players association, a union, so to speak, that is already used to being in all kinds of legal battles all the time to argue over basically everything, is going to at least have looked through that contract with enough detail to have at least some confidence that they could do it. But again, it's all up to legal interpretation. You could take two lawyers looking at the same piece of information and looking at the same contract and come to two completely different interpretations. The real question is going to be, what does the judge think? What does an arbitrator think? When they look at it, do they interpret it in one direction or do they interpret it the other? Do they see it Panini's way or do they see it Fanatics' way? Now, even though, as I said, I don't really know what's going to happen any more than anybody else does, it is certainly fun to speculate. Now, what I'm going to do here is I'm going to pause myself and I'm going to play a clip from that audio piece that I mentioned before, kind of outlining the best and worst case scenario. And then I'll come back. And when I come back, we'll talk about a couple of speculation pieces, because even though, as I said, I don't know what's going to happen any more so than anybody else does, although different people are willing to at least take some stabs in the dark at it. It is fun to speculate, but I am going to touch on a couple of thoughts that I have in terms of where the impact I think is going to be for this going forward. This clip, though, will help kind of give a little bit of an illumination because, as I mentioned in the clip, even though this isn't something that necessarily is going to impact me as a collector, it is something that I still believe is relevant. But in the clip, you'll kind of understand my thought process for it. And again, this was before any of this stuff ever came to pass. Not long before, but certainly before. But then coming on the other side of that now, I still agree with what I said then. And then I'm going to expand upon it a little bit more because now we have all this uncertainty. And I make reference to the uncertainty in the clip. But at the same time, going forward, the uncertainty is the only part of which we are truly certain. And what's going to happen going forward, I think, is going to be very much a topic worthy of debate because it is going to be relevant if you're someone who is collecting in that space. And also, we got to bear in mind that NBA version of it is still in the horizon, even though there hasn't been any new movement on that. So let me play the clip for you. I'll come back and then I'll talk to you a little bit about kind of where I think things are going to sit, at least for what we know going forward right now.
What things in your mind kind of get spinning as far as excitement goes? Like, what are you looking forward to as the hobby moves from 2023 into 2024?
Yeah, Fanatics and Panini. Like
Yeah.
it's very timely, it's very current. Like their battle is going to have something to say about what the next generation of the collecting looks like because they're fighting over a license that's going to last 10 to 20 years depending on the sport.
Yeah.
So Fanatics is going to have their piece of the pie. The question is, does Panini go down without a fight? Well, they're fighting, but the
Yeah.
question is, does that fight lead to anything for them? Do they hang around? Do they do unlicensed? So as a collector, it's not going to really affect what I do. Like, especially the old cards, like that's not going to affect any of that.
For sure.
I still care about the new cards though, and I'm still interested in what happens. So what they're doing is going to be relevant to what happens going forward and how people treat the hobby, depending on what it is they do.
Yeah. And let's go best case, worst case, in your opinion. What's best case scenario in this? And what's worst case scenario in this?
Best case scenario is that Fanatics figures out some way of getting Panini out of the way because I don't think Panini they can make unlicensed cards if they want to, but I don't think they're going to be able to hang on to any kind of a partial license or anything. I think Fanatics wants the whole pie or none at all. I think the likely scenario is they will fight for it, and if they manage to get their hands on it, I'm not going to say the product's going to be good or bad. I don't know. But I think it's going to change a lot of things because if they end up just getting the licenses, then they're not going to, all of a sudden your prisms and your optics and all the Panini stuff might just go away.
Interesting. Yeah. I'm with you. It's definitely going to be an interesting kind of rest of the year going into 2024 as kind of this big takeover is expected to happen. So,
so that's the best case scenario as they get it over with, figure out something. The worst case scenario, to answer the other half of your question, is worst case scenario is it drags out for a while. We don't get any certainty. People don't like uncertainty. Absolutely. And in the meantime, you've got these products that are kind of wishy-washy, and Fanatics has ownership stake in one of the printers. So what do you think happens if in the middle of dragging out this war, they just stall the printing lines?
Yeah.
That war becomes an all-out war. I'm a history major. So all of a sudden, so if we're talking about history major, you're talking about the world wars. That's a total war. Everybody's affected. You're collateral damage, even though you have nothing to do with it. You're sitting on the sidelines watching, and the bombs are still going off. The shrapnel still hits you, even though you're kind of sitting on the sideline.
Oh, man, I think we may have just found the title of this video, The Hobby World War.
Now, sitting on the other side of that clip, I do stand with what I said there because I do think it is going to be relevant in terms of what this is going to look like going forward in the future. In the first section here of the podcast, I mentioned that really only a handful of things have actually happened, and almost all the rest of the space that has been taken up in terms of the sheer amount of volume and content and videos and articles and everything all comes in the speculation side of it. Now, some people may wonder, well, why does everybody seem to enjoy speculating on it? Because it is going to be relevant to the way that this hobby is going to operate going forward. And as I said, this is kind of a precursor to what we're going to be looking at on the NBA side. If Fanatics is successful in this attempt to basically circumvent and be able to get around the limitations, the timeline that they had originally thought that they were going to have to deal with as far as being able to produce fully licensed football cards, which currently they can't. Even if they get their best case scenario as it stands right now, they would have the ability to produce the cards, but without the logos, because the NFL hasn't gone along with what the NFLPA has done. But that doesn't mean that they wouldn't if Fanatics was successful in this move. If they were able to get this to pass and basically get it to stand, then there's no reason the NFL wouldn't go along with this because they would want to be able to get cards out there. Now, regardless of what's going to happen here going forward, and we'll leave that to the arbitrator or the legal side of things, but regardless, it is going to have an impact on this season. And one of the key pieces, as I said, from a legal perspective, there isn't much there. There was the original move, and then there is Panini asking for the arbitration side of it. There could be subsequent lawsuits. We don't know what that's going to look like going forward. There's already plenty of lawsuits happening anyway. There's already a lot of that in the air. But the key to this, and one of the discussion points that I think we'll probably have on the live stream as well as any other discussions we have on this, is going to be what, if any, grace period there is. Panini is still moving forward with certain products that it had ready down the pipeline to release. So it looks like Panini is going to try to get out whatever products they have the ability to get out there. And what's going to be interesting about this is what happens to any products that are in flight, anything that isn't quite finished. Because Fanatics does have control over one of the printers. It's one of the elements that they have that give them a certain insight into how far along Panini is in some of the products they're trying to do. But if you're Panini, you're trying to release it. But if you're a distributor, if you're a dealer, if you're one of these other groups that are basically left hanging, wondering what the next move is going to be, it creates a ton of uncertainty for you. From the consumer side of things, if you are someone who is in the modern football card space, you've got uncertainty because you don't know what's going to come out next. You know that probably there's going to be a couple of products. There's Luminance and maybe one or two other products. There may be a little bit of a grace period there where Panini is able to release a couple of products that it was already basically printed on. The boxes are done, the cards are done, and they're finished. But what's going to happen going forward? What is this year's football season going to look like? How many products is Panini going to be able to release? How many, if any, products is Fanatics going to be able to release? Is it going to be a bit of a mix and match between the two? Or is everybody going to be stuck in kind of a limbo, waiting for the legal side of things to get settled in order to figure out who's going to be able to print what? And that uncertainty is going to probably have a major impact on this year's rookie class, on anything related to the football cards for this year. And that's going to be really interesting because obviously anytime you have any kind of disruption of this type, it certainly stands out and it becomes a noteworthy year in terms of collecting because it has a great impact on the sets and in terms of how they're perceived and how they're viewed going forward. As far as this particular scenario, we've never seen this particular scenario played out. We've seen transitions between manufacturers, licensees, we've seen that, but usually it's a much smoother transition. This is going to be a janky one, regardless of what's going to happen, and it's going to be based a lot in terms of how the legal side of things figures it out. But one, I guess the only one I can think of that definitely disrupted what would otherwise have been a normal production schedule is the year that the hockey had the lockout. So I'll use that as an example. 05-06, for the hockey folks may remember that was a year of double rookie cards because you had the lockout in the previous year. And that impacted not only the rookies, the rookie classes and everything related to that, but even if you had veteran players, it created a scenario where you had 1 year where you had a shrunken amount of products that actually were able to be released and less cards available. So for my player, Mike Medana was still playing in the league at that time. So there was a year there where after years of having year after year after year where there were hundreds of cards to pursue and chase after, there was a season there in 2004-2005 where the entire checklist for him is 32 cards. That includes parallels, that includes base cards, that includes inserts. And it stands out because the year prior, there were over 300 cards. And the year after, 05-06, things started to wind back up and it came to much more normal. So all of a sudden you had this weird disruption right in the middle of it, where you've got a year inside of a player's career where the amount of cards available for them shrinks relative to the norm. And what you're looking at here, and to be clear, we are speculating because we really don't know exactly how protracted this legal proceeding is going to be. Are they going to be able to come to some kind of a compromise? Is there going to be an injunction? Is any judge going to say, hey, in the meantime, while we're working this out, you guys have to stick to the status quo? There's a bunch of scenarios that could play out. But in the meantime, any delays, anything that disrupts the flow of sets. So for Panini, for example, if they basically are forced to, you can release what you've got, but anything beyond that, you have to stop. There's going to be a scenario here where this particular football calendar year is going to be unique. It's not going to match up with what happened the year before, and it's not going to match up with what happened the year after. Are we going to get the scenario, like I said, where you're going to have Panini was able to release a couple of products, and does Fanatics suddenly have the ability to release some football products in this season? But maybe those products are, partially licensed. It's got the players' name and likenesses, but they got to airbrush out or do some fanciness with the images in order to avoid showing the logos. Does the NFL come on board and join them, and then you actually get a fully licensed Fanatics/Topps product at the same time that you got a Panini product that's kind of basically releasing what they have left over? Do you create that little scenario for a little while there? You've actually got releases coming from two different manufacturers. That's a possible scenario as well. But regardless, it's going to change basically how this particular rookie year and how sets for some of the veteran players as well are going to be relative to the year before and relative to the year after, because you can expect that most likely next season would be operating more like a normal year, regardless of how they end up working it out. But the question is what happens in between, and how does that affect the amount of products that actually make it out onto the market, and how do consumers receive that product? Because we know one of the things that is very normal is that a lot of people simply do not accept the unlicensed or partially licensed, because a license is still a license if it's coming from the Players Association. You need 2 licenses to get the full picture, but you can still have sets with these players if you've got the League or Players Association's license specifically. The League is where you get the logos, but the Players Association is where you get the name and likeness. Now, the other wrinkle, of course, is what, if anything, happens with the NBA, because you've got that side of things. The NFL has stayed out of this so far. The NFLPA Players Association is the one who entered the fray and basically triggered this entire discussion and everything that's come out of it. But if the NFL joins in, that's going to change the dynamics. If the NBA in any capacity joins in, that's going to change the dynamics. And that could very well be the next shoe to drop. Does it become a situation where expanding this total war metaphor that Fanatics basically is able to encourage a few more of its partners to join in on its side? And the question is, how long does Panini want to fight this on for? Do they still believe that they have a chance to win? Or is it more of a situation of hanging in there out of stubbornness? And that length of time that they're going to hang in there and create that friction is what I think is going to have a direct impact on what this football card season is going to look like. And that'll be very interesting, especially for the current year's rookie crop, who may have less cards than what we're used to as far as, an average rookie card year for the football side of things. And for a lot of collectors, that might not actually be a bad thing. It might actually make it a lot more possible for you to attain it. The question is, as I said, if we do end up with some partially licensed stuff in between there, how does that affect the collectability of it? Does it make it more appealing? Does it make it less appealing? Who fills in the market gap if it turns out to be the case? Does Leaf kind of walk in and try to take advantage of it? If people are a little bit more amenable to unlicensed stuff or partially licensed stuff, does it create a situation where they create some product in there to kind of take advantage of the chaos? I could very well see that being the case as well. Now, obviously, that was the big topic, so I wanted to start off this podcast episode mainly talking about that. But now I'm going to quickly hit on a couple of small topics that we'll get into, and then obviously we'll have a chance to talk more about this during the live stream and probably in subsequent videos as more information comes to light and as we learn more about what the current situation is and if anything changes, really. Now, a couple of other things I want to talk about really briefly. Speaking of the football season, I have had the chance to watch the first 3 episodes of Hard Knocks. I've kind of enjoyed it. As a Packer fan who's kind of morbidly curious in terms of what's going on with Aaron Rodgers and kind of his joining his new team, I have enjoyed it very much in kind of the Aaron Rodgers infomercial. I've really have gotten quite a kick out of it. I'm highly entertained. I'm not going to lie to you. I've enjoyed it quite a bit, and I'm definitely looking forward to this football season. I'm going to have my Sunday ticket equivalent, the streaming package happening, and I'm going to be watching some Jets games for sure to see how that team comes together along with the Packers game, to see how Jordan Love does, and to see how this year ends up being. And that's just selfishly, as a football fan, specifically watching my team and my former Hall of Fame quarterback in terms of seeing how that ends up turning out. Now, away from football, one of the other things that I've done on the YouTube channel recently is that I did a breakdown of 2022 AEW Metal from Upper Deck and talking about some of that. It was a bit of a mixed bag. It wasn't all sunshine and rainbows, but not all bad either. It's one of those things where I had some questions in terms of how things came up with. But today, actually, earlier today, I did see that Cardboard Connections was nice enough to have a first look at 2023 AEW Metal. And I just started laughing because we had been waiting so long for 2022 AEW Metal to show up and to finally have a checklist. And, looks like the end is in sight. August 30th is presumably the street date that's finally going to drop. And that's going to be for the 2022 product. I do feel like they threw too much stuff in there. But getting an early look at 2023, you're going to see more of the same. They're going to bring in some other inserts, though, and some other elements that I think will be fun. Early looks at the design looks nice. Again, I'll reserve judgment until I see it in hand. But I do want to kind of mention it for twofold, because this weekend we're going to have the All Out show in London, and that's going to be a gigantic stadium show. I talk about that in the video as well, and kind of how that's a bit of a mixed blessing as far as that's concerned. I guess good timing to get the product out. But the other piece I wanted to quickly touch on here with this 2023 product coming in is that with all the delays, the 2022 AEW Metal product isn't coming out until late August and probably early September in Canada, because I think we usually get a little bit of a delay. It isn't going to be coming out until late August, early September of 2023. But we've got the situation where just now, we're being told about a 2023 product whose early release date is February of 2024. And this is where, it's a bit of a critique Honestly, if I'm advising people at Upper Deck, I think it's time that you start making adjustments to those years and dates, because understandably there's been a lot of delays. But just looking at the calendar from that one license, again, I'm being very niche here. I'm talking about one license, AEW, and that's it. If we're talking about that one license, we still have AEW Allure, which we don't have a checklist for yet, but hopefully we will down the road here. But before the end of the year, hopefully, crossing our fingers, we would have AEW Allure, and we would also have AEW 2023 before the end of this year. We're hoping, cross our fingers. But then we've got this other product that's technically a 2023 product that isn't scheduled to come out until at least 2024. Like at this point, it's time to just flip the calendar, just skip 2023 and just call it a 2024 product, because that's effectively what it's going to be. We've got two other products in front of it, and we haven't even released the third product that's going to technically be in front of it. I just think it's end up being a little bit weird. It creates this weird, confusing thing where like the date is wrong. They've done a decent enough job in the checklist of 22 to be able to update it reasonably well, but you may as well just end it with the 2023, because unless the other two products come out this year, we're still going to be a year off. But there's a real possibility, and I don't know if that's going to end up being the case. If there are any delays in the other two products, a couple of those could carry over into 2024. So it could be a situation where, you've got multiple 2023 products in the year 2024, and we're already years past the initial COVID issue that created a lot of these delays, and we're still being impacted in terms of seeing these years that completely do not match with the release date. It's just a very bizarre combination of things. From a collecting standpoint, it's very confusing. I guess it'll be for people down the road to try to decipher and be able to figure out what to make out of it. But it's just something that I saw, I laughed, but at the same time, I just shook my head. It's one of those things where you don't want to see it looking like that. It's just very bizarre. And it's just tough. It's a tough one to explain, and it's been very frustrating from the collecting perspective. Now, kind of a quick last topic is a bit of an injury bug coming out there. I did see that yesterday, at the time that I'm recording this, yesterday, Shohei Ohtani came out of a game while he was pitching with a UCL injury, and it looks like he's going to be no longer pitching as far as the rest of the season is concerned. But from what I understand, he's going to try to continue on as a hitter, which is going to be fine. He is a very good hitter, so it's one of those things where I understand it from that perspective. But between this and the Wander Franco news, which is still obviously up in the air, there's a legal element to that and an investigation element to that, so I won't comment on that too much more. It's a bit of a tough time if you're in the baseball collecting side of things, at least the modern guys. But going to the Ohtani one, because that's an injury, and injuries happen. It's one of those things where, unfortunately, it is a part of the game. But I guess a question that I would pose to anyone who is on the baseball card collecting side of things is, obviously, that's going to make Ohtani a lot less attractive. It's going to concern some folks. Some folks are going to sell some of the cards. But I guess my question going forward is, does that give you any concern with Ohtani if you are a collector of his? And by that, I mean not the specific season, not the specific injury, but, and this is pure speculation, but if as a result of this injury, he basically moves away from pitching going forward, it takes away one element of what makes him a special player. Basically a lot of the mystique of Ohtani is the fact that he was a very effective pitcher, in addition to being a very effective hitter, the combination of the two things. If he simply becomes a very effective hitter, not even necessarily an MVP caliber candidate type hitter, even though he's done extremely well this season, you just look at his stat line, he's done extremely well. If he's still a very good power hitter down the road here, though, is that enough to hold kind of the fixation that that segment of the hobby has for him? Because if he cannot be a full-time pitcher anymore, even a part-time pitcher, and he becomes an outfielder, or he basically takes a position somewhere in the field, and that's basically his job going forward. If he is a guy who can hit 35 to 40 home runs, but, hits 280, obviously this year he's hitting over 300, but if he's a guy who hits 280 and hits 35 to 40 home runs, is that enough to keep him special enough to make people excited about his cards? And that's where I guess the question that I would have is, it's more of an open question. I'd be curious what people's opinions are who are kind of in that lane and who are interested in that kind of thing. And that's kind of the question that I would have for it, because like I said, a lot of what made him special was that he was able to do both, at least reasonably well at the same time. Taking away one of those two things makes it obviously a lot less interesting for somebody, because then you just look at any other hitter who has equivalent or similar type stats, and then it becomes a lot less special, less of a unicorn and more just, hey, he's just a really good hitter. So with all that, I think we'll call it an episode. A couple of different things that we touched on there. We'll definitely come back to the whole discussion about what's going to happen with Fanatics and Panini as more things come into play, and we'll definitely have a chance to talk more about it. The YouTube channel is the hub where a lot of that information is going to come in, at least from my side of things. But if you are somebody who does listen to the audio version only, I would appreciate it if you could leave a review wherever you're able to do so, or if you're checking it out on the YouTube channel version of it, if you could hit the like or subscribe, that is always appreciated, and or leave any comments if you have any thoughts on kind of the topics that I touched on. With all that said, there will be more videos coming up on the channel and live streams on Friday at 8 p.m. Eastern Time, including talking more about some of these topics as we get into it. Thanks very much, and we'll catch you in the next episode.